Legend of the Shield. The Afflicted.
There he is! Mr. Lotleth! Mr. Lotleth!
The reporters gathered eagerly around the approach to the limousine as Ezoc slowly emerged. He looked uncomfortable, but swiftly dispelled it into a display of false bravado, flanked by two fierce-looking bodyguards as they grimly overlooked the braying crowd of flashing cameras and desperate journalists.
Do you have any word to give to the families involved in this attack? Do you know how long it'll take to treat the afflicted? Do you think you have what it takes to run this charity?
The last question hit him hard, and he bit his lip as he looked up to the hastily retrofitted building before him. The site had once been a hospital, long since put out of business, as rising costs and political point scoring stripped it of the power to help anyone. Now here it was again, and he could feel the weight of the responsibility starting to bear against him. The grim knowledge that it would help almost no one did nothing to relieve his discomfort, and he glanced over the eager faces that awaited his every word.
A word for the BINN, sir!
We will do everything we can.
How many people are expected to need treatment? How serious are the symptoms expected to be?
This kind of incident is unprecedented. We simply don't know yet how many have been affected. And from what we know of Sedis poisoning, we will do everything we can.
The crowd of journalists erupted into a storm of questions, and the bodyguards hurried him past them and into the building. The stillness inside was stark contrast, and he composed himself as he looked around to see a small number of smartly dressed managerial types waiting patiently for him.
Hello, Mr. Lotleth. My name's Judith Vines. I am the facilities manager here.
So how bad is it? Have we had many patients yet?
This site is treating over 1,000. We are a little over capacity, but it is to be expected.
She led him into the building, surrounded on all sides by politely smiling officials and yes-men. They nodded and pointed and discussed figures and policies, all the while led by the unsettlingly cheery demeanour of Mrs. Vines. She continued to lead him in a tour of the building, indicating the spotlessly clean corridors and the sterile but efficient kitchens and offices. After almost an hour of reports and projections, she finally stopped at one of the meeting rooms.
And you can see thereby that the funding has been well assigned to key logistical areas, allowing for the proper development of goal treatment and rehabilitation.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. I thought you said this place was almost at capacity.
It is.
So where is everyone? Where are the wards?
Mr. Lotleth, sir, the doctors are very busy, as you can understand. We won't be able to see the wards themselves today.
No.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lotleth, but I'm afraid it's simply impossible.
Then make it possible. I didn't come here to waste time inspecting offices.
Mr. Lotleth, I appreciate that you are keen to assert yourself in your new role, but I must deter you from interference in the doctor's duties.
Lotleth ignored her, turning to one of the bodyguards.
We saw two doctors heading into those double doors a couple of corridors back, didn't we? Come on.
He walked on, the bodyguards following behind him, as the manager stood shocked at their casual dismissal.
Mr. Lotleth!
Ignoring her, he swept forward towards the door, stopping only in mild frustration, as his access card refused to open the code lock. Knocking furiously, he caught the attention of one of the doctors inside, signaling for him to let them in, as the managers hurried to catch up.
Mr. Lotleth, I really must advise against interfering with the doctor's work in the wards.
Mrs. Vines, I really must advise against getting in my way.
The door swung aside, and Ezoc scowled as he entered the corridor beyond. Almost immediately, he could hear the moans of the people beyond, and the sterile stink of clinical equipment filled his nostrils. Pressing onward, he looked around as the corridor turned a corner into the ward proper, revealing ranks of beds filled with pale-looking victims. Many were hooked to respirators, the harsh beeps of the machines nearby drifting into the background of the drone of chatter and upset. Harsh coughs filled the air, patients struggling to contain the black phlegm that resulted. Bleary eyes turned to him as he entered, and his heart sank in pity as he looked around.
There's so many of them.
Sir, you shouldn't. One of the bodyguards warned him off, and Ezoc stepped slowly forward to see an unconscious child lying upon a hastily salvaged bed. A machine slowly transfusing blood into one arm and out of the other. It's one of several manifestations for the poisoning. The kidneys just simply can't keep up with cleaning it from the system. It's just one of many like him.
Where are all the other nurses? The other doctors?
There are 15 wards, but, we've only staffing for 10. The doctor glanced nervously to Mrs. Vines, whose smiley demeanour was turning sour with each word.
Why?
There simply aren't enough qualified available. We're stretched thin, but we are doing what we can.
Have you been able to help them?
Progress is slow. Some are definitely worse off than others. In most cases, it's a matter of blood poisoning or scorched lungs, sometimes better, sometimes worse, other times.
What the doctor is trying to say, Mr. Lotleth, is that further research and funds needs to be made available.
What about the worst cases?
We've had some fatalities already. Ezoc frowned, turning to face the doctor fully. He recalled what had been told to him before, what Darrow had talked about in regard to the mutations. For all their sickness and ill health, the patients here seemed normal enough, and it concerned him no one seemed to have mentioned anything more.
I meant the worst cases.
Well,
What the doctor means to say is that the range of symptoms is not yet fully understood. We've still some severe cases in isolation.
Then show me...
Ezoc trailed off as he noticed a number of armed men rushing down the corridor just beyond the ward. Without another word, he pushed past Mrs. Vines and rushed to follow, the managerial staff rushing to keep up with him. Bursting into the corridor, he caught sight of the armed men further down and continued to follow them, ignoring the calls of protest from Mrs. Vines and her cronies. Keeping pace, he followed them deeper into the wards, becoming increasingly aware of the distant shouts of pain. Without hesitation, he burst through a pair of double doors, even as they started to swing shut. Beyond, he looked into a large ward in horror as the armed men strapped down one of the patients and started to wheel him away. Overseeing it was a tall, slender man in a smart, tailored suit, who glanced back over his shoulder as Ezoc entered the room.
What's going on?
Sergeant, please remove the patient.
Sergeant, hold it right there! Who are you? What's going on?
Mr. Lotleth, I had hoped to find you.
Ezoc frowned as he recalled the voice. Though it had belonged to another man, the voice remained almost precisely the same as the suited man that had chased him from the crash site.
What are you doing here?
Inspecting.
Bones, get away from me! What are you?
Ezoc sidestepped the suited man, running to the patient's side as he struggled within his restraints. He showed no signs of the bleary, bloodshot eyes common to the others, nor the pallid skin and the harsh coughs. Were it not for his panic and the wild stare of his eyes, he would have seemed quite normal.
It's alright, it's okay.
Get away from me! I have to wake up! I have to wake up! Don't eat me!
No one is trying to eat you. You are awake. What do you see?
The patient steadied, if only for a moment, turning his gaze to Ezoc as though he saw some kind of monster.
All I can see is skeletons.
The patient shivered, turning his head from one person to another as he murmured,
The Walking Dead. Even my hands.
Tears fell from his eyes as he lifted his head to look at his hand.
What's happening to me? What's happening to me?
Take him to processing.
Wait! Tell me what you see.
He held up his left hand, outstretching his fingers, and the patient passed his view over them in turn.
My finger. It's not real. It's metal. But how can I know that?
He turned to look back at Ezoc, but his eyes opened wide in horror. Ezoc flinched back, only to realize the suited man stood right behind him.
Sergeant?
The soldiers wheeled the patient away before Ezoc could speak further. The man upon the bed suddenly silent, as though struck dumb in fear. Ezoc rose slowly, turning to face the suited man behind him.
X-ray vision? Some kind of X-ray? He knew my finger was artificial.
You do not seem surprised.
Darrow told me what this place really is.
The suited man's cold smile extended, lending an uncomfortably off air to his already uncanny features.
Did he indeed?
What is your business here? Who are you?
I am with the investors in this enterprise. I represent the Unshiri.
Really? And what do I call you?
The agent smirked, but gave no answer.
You are looking well, Mr. Lotleth. Not feeling the effects yourself, then?
I was lucky.
Perhaps.
Before Ezoc could speak, he saw the managers had finally caught up. Mrs. Vines looking annoyed at their head.
Where are the special cases being taken?
To
She glanced nervously to the suited man, who only seemed to stand watching her carefully.
there is an isolation ward lower down.
Where?
Where indeed, Mrs. Vines?
Follow me.
Slowly she led them from the ward, and the patient's concerned gaze leading them down the corridor to another ward kept far from sight from the rest of the hospital.
Tell me, Mr. Lotleth, what do you expect to find?
I'm not sure I want to know.
How wise.
Stopping at last at a pair of double doors, Mrs. Vines keyed in the code, the obstructions hissing open as they revealed a long ward within, lined with plastic cages housing bedridden men, women, and children. They were widely spaced, and seemed oddly comfortable compared to his fears of what had lain hidden here.
Is this it?
He asked in surprise. He had expected far worse, but only a small handful of people were here, perhaps no more than 30 at most.
These people have shown unusual symptoms. The science team are gathering information now.
What kind of symptoms?
Vision peculiarities, unusual blood flow, abnormal skin lesions or muscle growth, among others.
Ezoc looked around as he saw a scientist at the far end of the room, scribbling down notes as he tested a child that seemed to be lighting an electric bulb simply by touch. Another man in one of the cells was frowning at a chair, the furniture piece shifting as though tugged by unseen hands.
Superhumans?
Afflicted.
Time to go, Mr. Lotleth.
Lotleth smiled a moment, his eyes glancing over the room and catching sight of a camera at the corner of the chamber. Without a word, he nodded, waiting for the others to turn around as he deftly borrowed one of the scientist's infopads that had been left on a table nearby. He remained quiet throughout as they were slowly led back through the hospital, finally returning to the waiting car outside as the gaggle of journalists clamored to try and talk to him. He said nothing, lost in his own thoughts as he waited for the car to start moving, before slowly retrieving the stolen infopad from inside his jacket.
Alright, let's try a little jiggery-pokery.
He started flicking through the settings, using the information saved on the pad to break into the hospital's Wi-Fi connection. In moments, he had slipped into the building's intranet, gathering all he needed for later. Once he was finally at his office, he was quick to get on his own computer. It wasn't long before the database began displaying over his screen, listing dozens of people who'd been classified as of special interest. He frowned, recalling the small handful of people from before, and he became shocked as the list just kept growing.
How many of these people are there?
He whistled in disbelief, cycling through the paperwork only to find records of far worse than mere visual changes and mind powers. Struck by what was written, he felt compelled to check and busily hacked into the hospital CCTV. Slowly, the images came online, revealing more wards, larger ones hidden from the public, beneath the buildings. He watched in horror at the sight, looking at the plastic cells that contained the monsters lurking within. Men half-formed of bone, mutant aberrations, twisted animals, and people more like hulking brutes than men. Tears rolled down his face at their wails, and anger boiled in him as he saw the suited man watching it all impassively.
The Afflicted.
He murmured as the suited man turned his face up toward the camera and smiled.